From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How today, Joelle?
I was just thinking, we've had a lot of changes since our last recording. We've had Alicia has moved on to a new employer.
Chief psychology role, officer role. That's pretty exciting for her.
It is very exciting for her, and nice to see our team graduating into big and important roles.
Yeah, I think many of them have that kind of aspiration to take on roles like that, where it's responsible for the strategic direction and oversight of a strategy. Yeah. That's very cool for her. Well done, Alicia.
Yes, well done, Alicia. And Courtney has gone on maternity leave and has just had her second baby.
Yeah, different type of challenge.
Very different type of challenge. Yes, different type of coordinating and planning involved there.
Yep. So, team is looking a little bit different, and hopefully we can make that data science hire sooner rather than later for Tim's team. That will be fun.
It will be. Yep.
How else is the life of Joelle at the moment? I know she had a haircut on the weekend.
I did have a haircut on the weekend, but that happens reasonably regularly, so it's probably not super notable, especially for people listening to a podcast.
Yeah, this is true. So now, you weren't willing to tell me in the office before, but will you tell me now that we're on the podcast, how much did you pay for your haircut?
No, I'm not going to tell you that.
I thought being on a recording, you would actually tell me.
Aren't you a psychologist? That means you have insights into human behaviour.
Well, you should know because you just recently supervised me for my endorsement.
I did. So that's kind of what I'm getting at, Jason. I was just being more subtle about it.
Okay. But the discussion was, for those of you who don't know what Joelle's hair looks like because you only listen to us on the podcast and you never check out the YouTube channel, Joelle has quite short hair. It's a pixie cut, right?
It is a pixie cut.
Yeah. But I'm like, why couldn't a barber do that? And if you went to a barber like mine, you'd pay $20, $25 max for a haircut, which I'm sure
that looks like yours.
Well, that's what they say when you're a man. There's only 2 weeks difference between a bad haircut and a good haircut. So even if you weren't completely satisfied with it initially, you'd grow into it. And you'd probably save, I don't know, $1,000 a year on haircuts.
I'm glad you added the a year qualifier to that because otherwise you've grossly overestimated how much I spend on haircuts.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a ballpark. Anyway, we'll work it out one day.
Just so that you can shame me about what I spend on haircuts.
I don't think it's. Are you ashamed of how much you spend?
No, I'm just wondering why
would I shame?
Well, you have a wife. You know how much she spends.
I know, but she has long, girly hair.
Long hair is easier to cut than short hair.
Yeah, this is true. But why doesn't she should go to a barber too? I should tell her that.
Well, a lot of barbers won't cut women's hair.
Yeah, this is true. She should go to mine. Mine's willing to do anything, I think. $20, $25.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
I'm happy with where I'm going. I've recently changed, actually, and I'm happy with my choice.
Okay. Are you going to the same one that Brendan goes to?
No.
Him and Harry both go to the same hairdresser. They're both very happy with her.
Okay, no, I don't go there.
Okay, just checking. All right. Hey, look, this is not a show about haircuts.
It's not. No. I do note that our guest has recently converted to a pixie cut as well, and it's very flattering if I say so.
I think it's a terrific fit for this particular person.
Sure is.
We should invite her in. She's been waiting long enough.
Yep.
Yeah. So
see how I segued there?
It's a great segue.
Thank you.
With over 20 years of experience delivering strategic advice to national and global companies, boards and business leaders, she specialises in optimising how organisations approach health, safety and leadership. She's the immediate past chair of the Australian Institute of Health and Safety and expert member of Queensland's WHS board and currently the CEO and co-founder of Frank Capability Leaders. Welcome to the podcast, Naomi Kemp.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Joelle.
Now, Naomi, this isn't actually your first time on the podcast. I believe last time you were on, was the first time you'd ever been on a webinar/podcast with us, and that was a few years back now.
Yes, and we had Dr. Rebecca Michalak with us, so I'm flying solo today.
Yeah, Beck was the one that actually made the introduction to you, I believe, at the time, and we've been fast friends since. Yes, it was your first time on, and if only there was a phrase that you could use for like when someone's on something for the first time, and you help them overcome that first thing. Anyway, great to have you on again. Anyway, Naomi, this is the second time, and
yeah, that's the word I was thinking. Induction, Jason.
I'm glad that we're able to help you through your induction in the podcasts, and really glad to have you on a second time, and hopefully not the last time. But really interested in
the last time wasn't the last time, then I think we're
safe.
We're safe
okay,
from
cool.
here on. Yeah. And not live as well. So anything that anybody says can be edited out if necessary.
Why would we need to edit? We never edit anything out.
What podcast do you like to listen to, Naomi?
Good question. This is where I get nerdy. So I do listen to safety podcasts, but my ultimate favourite is Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell. But I am a bit of an Adam Grant work-life follower as well.
Yep. Those are the ones to listen to if you're going to listen to that kind of thing.
Obviously, I like my Canadians.
Adam Grant's not Canadian.
Is he Canadian? I don't know.
Malcolm Gladwell is. He's in Pennsylvania, Adam Grant.
I'm happy to be proven wrong. Doesn't he work out of a Canadian university?
Pennsylvania.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, UPenn. Yeah. Anyway, but doesn't matter.
No.
Adam, if you're listening, please don't take offence.
Well, he might be. He might be our latest mega fan now that he's been on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your professional career, please, Naomi?
So, believe it or not, I'm actually a qualified hairdresser. I wasn't going to mention that, but now that we started talking about haircuts, and if I was to quote, I'd say probably about $85, Jason.
Okay. Good to know.
That's a bargain.
Oh.
Bargain for a lady's haircut.
But let's fast forward. So I worked as a health and safety practitioner in mining and heavy industry for a number of years. I grew up in a mining town, so as you can imagine, it's pretty easy to get into the mines when you're a local. Then from there, I actually went and studied, and that was when I did health and safety, a little bit older than straight out of high school. And then from there, I was scholarship with the government. So I actually worked for Workplace Health and Safety Queensland, and then transitioned once I left there into education. So I was at university. And then from there, that's when I've gone into consulting and working for myself and establishing Frank with Rick Fox.
That's a very succinct work history.
Yeah, but
possibly the quickest one that we've had.
yeah, but obviously very experienced.
Yes.
Normally I can drag that on and talk forever. What I will say is I'm a certified health and safety generalist, and I think that's really important for this conversation because I imagine a lot of your audience might be HR generalists, might be health and safety practitioners, or they'll be psychologists and sort of psychosocial practitioners or professionals as well. So I'm coming at this conversation from a generalist health and safety risk lens and perspective.
Yeah, which is an important framing to give because, we do have listeners from all different backgrounds, and it is really always good to hear from guests who aren't organisational psychologists because a lot of the time, listeners think that that's what they need to do to be able to do this work, which we know isn't the case.
Yeah, part of the work.
Yeah, and this I've seen this stoked up on LinkedIn a bit recently, talking about depth versus breadth, right? And you want both, but you don't have to have one person doesn't have to have depth and breadth. There's different roles that they will perform and can be brought in for different things.
Exactly, yeah. And I spoke the other day at a networking event, and I talked about it's the old knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know, and I think there was a Confucius quote in there as well. That is the ultimate knowledge. is, to be really have a good grounding and, self awareness of where your qualifications or your experience cuts out and where you need to then engage or defer to expertise. And if it's in a clinical situation from a psychosocial perspective, then if you're not a clinician, then that's when you seek that expertise.
Yeah. In a similar way, if you had hazard that needed engineering controls, then you'd probably get an engineer in, right, rather than try and design it yourself. Yeah, perfect. Speaking of LinkedIn, I guess this is what's prompted us to invite you back on the podcast, because I had done a LinkedIn post regarding should we have critical risk controls for psychosocial hazards, given that there has been research in recent times, particularly out of New Zealand, which has made a clear link between psychosocial hazard exposure or work demands and suicide. So we know that people die from unmanaged psychosocial hazards, right? It's a clear link in the literature.
Also like cardiovascular events and those types of things as well, right? Strokes, that kind of stuff.
Correct, yeah. So when we look at just suicide deaths, it's only a small part of the overall kind of deaths that could arise from psychosocial hazard exposure when you think about other health issues. We thought it was actually funny because I then ran into you, I think, that week, you and Rick Fox at the WHS show in Sydney. And Rick reminded me that you'd done a fair bit of work around this, thinking about critical risk controls for psychosocial hazards. I was like, perfect, let's get Naomi on the podcast. So thankfully, you're willing to come back a second time. So to get us started, maybe, Naomi, you could maybe let us know what is a critical risk, particularly given that, again, many of our audience aren't health and safety practitioners. So what is a critical risk and how is it different from other risks at work?
Cool. So let's start out. Actually, there's two types of critical risk. And when I speak to psychosocial being a critical risk, I'm actually talking about it being a critical business risk. And when we look at it through that lens, we're talking about the material impact something might have on your business. And therefore, it's critical because you're prioritizing that. When we talk enterprise risk or business risk, we're talking finance, we're talking legal, we're talking reputational damage, workforce management, competition. So there's all stakeholders, there's all those, it might be patients if you're in a healthcare setting. So you're looking at that spectrum of risk and what might impact your business and therefore liquidity potentially, or even just existence in itself. That is quite different to when we talk about critical risk from a health and safety perspective. Generally, when we're talking about those critical risks, we're talking about fatal and serious risks. And often that is immediate risk. So, worker at height falls, it's immediate fatality. Often we do see asbestos thrown in there, which is the only one that's kind of out of the box there. It's not an immediate fatal risk, but we do know it does have fatal consequences. So that's the difference when I talk about it being a critical risk, because it does have impacts to those. It is a driver to those business risks in its entirety. That's what I was after.
Yeah, so the enterprise risk as well as the health and safety risk both can have dramatic impacts. Let's unpack that further.
So the health and safety risk kind of contributes to things like reputation and legal risk and financial risk and all of those kinds of things. Yeah.
Yeah, that too. Yeah, there's crossover, right, Naomi?
So how are critical risks then typically managed within an organisation?
So the answer is controls, like any risk. Often, though, we then frame them, if we have critical risk, we might have critical controls. And what we mean by that are, it might be one specific control or it might be a group of controls that collectively together are critical to manage that risk and specifically to prevent harm. So if we look at critical risks, they're often defined by the consequence being fatal or severe. And so the controls we want to try and put in place, those critical controls, are trying to reduce that level of harm or that consequence. Because often these risks do have a very low likelihood. So we're not necessarily talking about likelihood if we're looking at the likelihood consequence matrix. So you want some examples perhaps in terms of critical controls? Naturally, if we were talking at physical and engineering, we would have guarding in place. But if we're looking at psychosocial and we're looking at work demands and cognitive load, then we might be looking at the work design itself and how can we structure that job to suit the people who are doing it and the cognitive demands on those people.
So looking at things like, I guess at an enterprise level, like workforce planning, how well do we understand the cognitive and time effort involved in different activities, and how do we make sure that we're resourcing for that appropriately, those sorts of things. Probably like working hours management as well, fatigue, and those types of things too.
That was exactly where I was about to go when you mentioned workforce management. So if we were look at it from that enterprise perspective, obviously our rosters and how we're going to structure a 24/7 operation, for example, would definitely be at that enterprise level versus we have 5 departments, and then this particular department, our call centre, let's say, has a significant cognitive demand on them. That might be a little bit more isolated in terms of the organisation.
Yeah, and so then that's more around how do we design the job to make those demands manageable.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty clear that psychosocial hazards do pose an enterprise risk. But I guess what I'd like to know from you, Naomi, do you believe that psychosocial hazards are a critical health and safety risk?
So this is where I would liken it. If we're going to say asbestos is an exposure to asbestos, if we're purely going to compare it to the current physical, and I'll use the word physical to try and make it simple, critical risks, then yes, absolutely, because we have that. The research shows that correlation. We are seeing it in enforceable undertakings and prosecutions already. There's a history of it. We go back to Brodie in Victoria, that case, which was I think about 2005. We've known for a long time.
Yeah.
For listeners who aren't familiar with Brodie's Law, Naomi, can you give us some information about that?
Minimal, yes. Brodie's Law is in Victoria only. It is part of criminal law, and it's associated with bullying and harassment of a worker. Brodie was a worker in a cafe, and they were found guilty of causing harm to her, which she then died by suicide.
Yeah. Thanks, Naomi.
So if you were to put your black hat on for a moment, Naomi, there are some people out there who would contend that, psychosocial shouldn't be included in critical risk register. Why would that be the case, do you think? What would be their argument for that?
I think the argument is that critical risk is still evolving. It's grown out of mining. It's come into construction. And I don't think they've got the answer for it in those industries just yet, which are high risk, and there's working at heights and there's explosives and confined spaces and atmospheres. And I don't think they've mastered it there in terms of making it really grounded at the worker level. And so you go and introduce something that is grey and murky, that psychosocial is and mental health is. And I'm going to say it, but those industries are heavily male dominated. So again, you're introducing something into a workforce that might not want to talk about these things as well. So I think you've got a couple of barriers perhaps to bringing that into the regular speak of critical risk in an organisation, let alone then taking that to every other organisation. I think if we tried to tackle it in healthcare, it would be a completely different story.
Yeah. What's the, maybe just some other things that I've heard. So some people say it makes people focus on the wrong things. So When we talk about critical risk, often we have golden rules attached to those things where people are focused on these are the things that could kill me and these are the critical controls that are in place to keep me safe. And we're largely obviously talking about things that kill you in the moment, right? And we want people obviously focused on those things and attentive to those things during the workday. But there's no reason that you can't have your golden rules separate potentially from your critical risks, or, there's a distilled version of the golden rules from the critical risks, right?
Yep, I'm nodding away here, Jason.
For those not watching the video, Naomi is nodding.
I realise that. I think it's also volume, right? So a good example is Lang O'Rourke. They had their Next Gear website, which I think has slightly changed now, and they have all their FSRs, fatal severe risks, listed. And I want to say there's at least 12 on there. So, eventually it becomes like, well, what isn't a critical risk? And so therefore, what are we prioritizing? How many golden rules do we have to have? But if you think about it, don't bully, don't sexually harass. They would be golden rules in every organization anyway. So why can't they be on the list?
Yeah, it's more that those things have been framed as HR rather than safety matters. So it's a conduct issue rather than a safety issue.
Yeah, and maybe that's one of the issues, right, with it, in that people go, well, it's conduct, it's not a safety-related matter, or it doesn't have those consequences.
Yeah, but if I push somebody down the stairs, that's conduct as well as safety. So why can't bullying also be conduct as well as safety?
That's a good argument.
Yeah.
I think there's also, in terms of critical risk programs or critical control, whatever you want to call them, those programs, they're successful when there's psychological safety. So that's why I think it should be part of your critical risk program, because you want people to speak up. You want them to talk about their concerns around controls for working at heights or confined space. If they're not willing to speak up when they know it's a golden rule that's not being followed, then we have big problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And then going into injury reporting and that kind of thing as well, right? And actually making sure that people are reporting when they do receive an injury. All of those disincentives that are still unfortunately very, very strong. A lot of places. So yeah, it's definitely kind of feeds all the way through.
And the blame that might attribute to you because you didn't quite follow the golden rule.
Yeah, you got injured and now we don't get our bonus for LTI free. Yeah.
So obviously most organisations, particularly in high-risk industries, they'd have dozens, if not 100 plus hazards and controls, or easily over 100 controls that might be in an organisation in a hazardous context. What is the benefit of recognising a certain health and safety risk as critical and elevating controls to that critical level as well?
If I speak from my experience in an organisation where we had pretty much every workplace imaginable, because we were researching it, so you can draw the lines there, you can imagine the size of the risk register. So we've pretty much got, excluding nuclear, we had pretty much every risk from every workplace. Exposure was going to be low naturally. But at some point when you are reporting up to boards or reporting to executives and boards, you need to narrow that down. You need to prioritise that down for them to have the greatest impact and get the attention where you need it. So you're not going to report on all 100 risks in your risk register. You're going to talk to your top 10 or maybe your top 20. And so therefore that's your critical risk.
Yeah, I saw Kim Grady give a presentation on their critical control program, and they had elevated psychosocial to that as well. And one of the things I liked was, when thinking about things like organisational changes that are rolled through, when something is recognised as a critical control or a critical risk, that has to be considered during that change. So if we think about the recent UTS example, making 400 people redundant, have we considered all of our critical risks in this? Psychosocial, have we actually thought about like the potential consequences that this will have on people? And are we doing this in the lowest risk possible way? that might have prevented the regulator from intervening in that case.
So, and that's a super interesting case, which I would be reporting that if I was reporting to the board as a standalone project. So you would look at your change management, the risks associated with that change. Before your regular risk reporting and your risk profiling of an organisation, that your top 10 could change. So we might start out with very psychosocials in that top 10, but with in 3 years' time, it might fall out of the top 10 because we're actually got our critical controls in place and we're managing it really well.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the Flourish DX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow Flourish DX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the Flourish DX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
So what should organisations be doing so that they can be confident that they are adequately identifying and managing psychosocial risk?
So my one-word answer would be capability, which is what we talk about at Frank. And so we sort of frame it in terms of three elements: the systems that you have, the customs or the practices and processes that you have, and the people, whether they're competent and skilled, experienced. So in terms of your system, do you have the resources? And that might be some really awesome software. It might be the people that you have. Do you have a CMO or a chief mental health officer or something like that in your organisation? Do you need one? So those systems to, one, identify, help you assess and track your risk. Then your customary practices. Here we talk about your team leaders, your senior management, your boards, so having those processes in place for the people at whatever level that they need to intervene at or have prevention controls in place, so that we can monitor, we can review, we can adapt, and we can maintain, essentially, I don't like using the word culture, but we can maintain the culture or that psychological safety culture that we want in the organisation. And the last, as I said, people, are they skilled? Are they competent? Do they understand? Do they know how to comply? That's what organisations need to look at holistically to ensure that they've got everything in place and they're doing everything they possibly can do to manage a critical risk, whether that is psychosocial or it's working at heights.
I'm just wondering if like a worked example might help there. So if we were to take an example of a hazard, what would those three domains actually look like in managing that hazard?
Okay, so let's. I was just going to say we could just talk about psychosocial risk, right? So in terms of your systems, then you might have the Flourish DX software, so that enables you then to conduct your risk assessment, survey your employees, conduct your risk assessment. Jump in if I'm saying the wrong thing here. It gives you that reporting and that dashboard to understand where you're currently at. You would need, in terms of resources as well, the people in your organisation to own that and be the risk owner, whether that is HR or safety or both, or operations. So then we take that over to, in terms of practices, do our supervisors and team leaders understand the risk, what that system is telling us for their team and their unit, and what are the controls that they need to put in place if they're road construction workers working in heat, doing long shifts, on shift work potentially. What does that look like for that team leader and that supervisor to manage that team? Equally, what does their department manager, what's what's their role in managing that risk within their department? And then what are we seeing reported at a board level, for example? And so then what's their role in terms of that tone from the top down through? And then, of course, they're all individuals. So what's the skill set we're looking for each of those roles?
So one of our colleagues, Ben Evans, went and attended a session that you and Rick put on, I believe, with AICD, where you're doing some education of board members. He really rated it. He thought it was amazing how you took a really practical example of a case and people had to work through that at their tables. So kudos to you and Rick for coming up with a really immersive way of training people on their due diligence obligations and how to exercise that well. But related to that, I guess, given your work with boards and execs, what sort of information should they be asking of the organisational leaders to understand whether psychosocial risk is appropriately identified and managed?
So this is where context is key for your organisation, and we're both PCBUs, so even that alone is very different. What you have in place would be different to what we have in place. Similar but different. And then, of course, if we are a global organisation, that's going to be a whole nother level again in terms of hierarchy and board structure as well. And then if I look to the left and look at our not-for-profit organisations, again, similar but different, the way they are structured. So with that in mind, and if you're not a small business, if you're a large business, it's going to be different again. So depending on if it is a board, what type of board and what that structure is will be very dependent. And we actually also even talked about whether or not you are a paid director on a board. Are you essentially a volunteer, which means that you're somewhat protected under the legislation? So how much due diligence does that obligation, does that impact you, is still very questionable as well. But to answer the question, sounds like I was doing the politician answer there. Governance, we need to remember a board is there to govern. They are not there for operations. That is what the executive management is. That's what the CEO is. So the CEO most definitely will have due diligence obligations. And that's where I think we need to be ensure that we don't get confused with our board directors thinking that they have some sort of operational role. They don't. They're a governance role. And so we need to satisfy, or they need to satisfy themselves. And we don't generally say satisfy, we generally say they need to verify that the organisation, that management have those controls in place and they are managing that risk. So they need to ask the question, what information do I need from there? Now, when I talk to directors, I say, hey, if you've got a safety manager, have a conversation with them if you don't know what that answer is, or bring them in and let's work out what that is. What it might be, if they've got awesome software, it might be a dashboard. It might be a report that they're getting. Generally, those larger organisations will have some sort of something more than a spreadsheet. For small organisations, it might be more of a manual risk assessment or a report, or as I know Flourish has now got the risk assessment process in place. So for entry level, you might come in and be able to get that and use that as well as for information. Or it might be as simple as having someone come in and just do an audit and provide that as a report.
Yeah, I think that's maybe underutilised sometimes. I think sometimes the board forgets that they can request independent audit of, I guess, the current processes and that sort of thing. And I think just from a learning experience internally for those health and safety people who are trying to elevate their approach to psychosocial, having that is a good way for them to learn, I guess, what are the things that we do have in place, what are the things that are missing, and see that as an opportunity for improvement. There's often gaps that people are just blind to, I think, that are too close to the role.
Yeah. Yep.
Also see, there's a lot of times when I guess boards are used to receiving information about mental health in the workplace in a certain way. So the most common things that are reported up to the board are things like EAP utilisation. What are the reasons that people are accessing that for? How many percentage of the workers have, done mental health first aid training, for example? But none of those things would actually meet requirements, right, under legislation for officers to exercise their due diligence obligations.
I go back to that word verify. So you need to verify that there are systems and processes in place to identify the risk, control the risk, respond to the risk if it's realised, and ensure compliance. So if EAP is a mitigated control, then that report tells us if it's effective or not, if it's worth the return on investment as a mitigating control. So it might be important information, again, depending on the context. If it's heavily used, then that might actually also tell you something. So I wouldn't say no, but I think that's information that should form part of a whole, more of a holistic report on people and culture in your workplace, for example. So the scenario that you talked about, we actually had a profit and loss statement and a people and culture report. Now, they didn't even need to read the people and culture report. If they just looked at the P&L, they would see where the money was being spent, and they could identify from there issues, psychosocial issues, accompanied with the people and culture report. Then that sort of really underlined and highlighted the specific issues that were happening in the organisation. So that was why it was such an interesting challenge for the board directors. Was obviously they only had a short amount of time to look at those papers, but to dig deep, and they could walk away and go, okay, now I could look at a P&L in another organisation and maybe have the same type of questions.
Yeah, even without the report supporting it. Yeah. You have just given a spoiler alert, though, for anyone that does one of your programs in the future. And it's kind of like giving people their keys to the escape room now. Like, you've just told them where to look.
Oh, we change it up. It's context, right? We'll change it up.
Yeah, but it's a good one, right? A great example, because, you know, being able to interpret a P&L should be a core kind of skill of a board member. And every board will have access to a P&L. Whereas you won't necessarily have a people and culture or a risk assessment report to review.
And so for newbies, P&L is a profit and loss statement. And yes, so you may not get a P&C report, or you might only get one every 3 months or every 6 months or once a year. And I think the key part was our report was a little bit colourful in terms of, you know, everything was very positive. And often that can be an issue in board papers, as well as people are scared to tell you what's actually happening, or there might be a legal issue, so you might not want to put that in the report. So you really have to pull back the layers.
So, sorry, Naomi, just to clarify, when you described or characterised EAP as a mitigating control, you meant mitigating as on like right-hand side control rather than risk. Yeah, rather than if we talk about elimination and then mitigation. Yeah. The same word used in different contexts. Yeah.
Yes. Early intervention, I believe, is more what it's referred to in the psychosocial.
Yeah, so after there's been exposure as a way to reduce the harm associated with the exposure.
Yes.
Good, thank you. Just want to clarify.
It's on the record.
Yep. Because mitigating means different things for different people. So.
Naomi, do you do expert witness stuff at all? Are you used to this line of questioning? For the record. It did sound like very much a lawyer type question.
I was an expert witness in a hairdressing negligence case, yes, many years ago.
Well, expert on both sides, health and safety and hairdressing.
Well, you know, if you want to know what's reasonably practicable. Yep. So what would you love to see? So you work with a lot of organisations and have done for quite a while. So, you know, thinking about the sort of what you're seeing with patterns and common approaches, what would you love to see organisations doing differently when it comes to psychosocial risk?
Now, can I be greedy and have two things?
I suppose we can allow that.
Oh, let's just check the time.
Yeah.
Yes, you can answer.
All right. My number one here is reliance on surveys to identify and monitor and pulse check. I think, you know, survey fatigue is a thing. I am very critical of us, and critical in different different definition of us relying on surveys, because it just depends on how you're feeling at the time when you sit in front of a computer to complete the survey or the pulse check. They're great for scale, but this is a people issue, and I find that we get so much richer insight and value out of actually talking with people. So how can we sort of get that information and get it into our systems without relying on them just filling out a survey or ticking 1 to 5 or strongly disagreeing or agreeing with something? I don't know the answer to that. At scale, obviously it's easier in smaller organizations to have those one-to-ones or focus groups.
Yeah, we tend to agree. So we've got our playbook that will probably be out by the time this airs. Anyway, the psychosocial safety playbook, the definitive and free resource for internal professionals to help them up their game on psychosocial safety. But when we talk about risk assessment, we go from this, we talk about the levels of ease to deploy different types of risk assessment methodology. And when we talk about ease, we're talking about how much buy-in do you need, budget, resourcing, time, that sort of thing, right? Going up to things that are more impactful but might require more buy-in and more resourcing and whatnot. And we definitely start with desktop risk assessment, just using the data that you've got, just kind of like maybe look at a 5x5 risk matrix and estimate, make your best judgment with consultation with some people in the workforce regarding, where that risk might be. Quantitative risk assessment takes a lot of the judgment out of it. We also know that psychosocial hazards, the way they cause harm is actually how people perceive them necessarily, rather than just objectively, are they there or are they not there? So unless you actually go out and consult with workers and actually ask about how they perceive these hazards, you're not actually going to be able to quantify the likelihood and consequence of harm occurring or arising. But we always recommend, qualitative insights are gleaned from people, and not just with, here's an open-ended text response, jot some thoughts down, go in there and be able to ask follow-up questions, do your 5 whys, really try and get down to the root cause and think about the interactions. Because like you say, unless you talk to people, you have to make a lot of assumptions and you don't really get the richness of their experience without that conversation. But we recommend the way that it all works together is, if you do your quant risk assessment, if you're talking at scale, like you said, how do you scale up focus groups? Because they're not really scalable. If you've got an understanding of risk first, you can prioritise follow-up with the highest risk groups. And you might decide not to follow up with the ones that are already low risk because it looks like things are going well. So you're doing it a little bit differently to an engagement survey where you might expect every team to have an action plan. With this one, you really want to make sure that you're putting in additional controls or improving the existing controls in areas of the business where it's demonstrating that it's not being managed well.
Beautifully said. I can't add anything more to that.
Why don't you ever say anything nice to me like that, Joelle?
I sometimes say nice things to you, Jason.
Okay. Let's put it rarely, but that's okay. No, thanks, Naomi. Yes, you got something else to add, though.
So my number
Second.
2.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
number 2 is, so we talk about prevention and safety. I think there's a prevention in HR or people and culture, whatever we want to call it here. And I feel my HR colleagues are a bit like what we find in safety. We're always fighting fires. There's always a grievance, or there's always something, redundancies. There's always something happening. We're always we're in that fighting fire mode. And so we need to be able to try and shift our workload in that space to be more preventative. So what does it look like? How can we have, job crafting or smart work design, or have those tools front and center so we can be more preventative in that, setting people up for success when they onboard, and then when they leave, they actually don't want to leave. But we're happy to see them go because they're going on to bigger and better things, perhaps. So yeah, in terms of that HR side of things, that was my other number 2.
Yeah, and often we see that in HR, that they don't realise that actually, all of these systems of work that we already have ownership of and manage are actually, while they might have been designed for a different type of people risk, they can also be used very effectively to manage psychosocial risk. And a lot of the time it is just around sort of tweaking and refining either the nature of those things or how they're applied within the business. So yeah, there's definitely that, who's the owner comes into this quite a lot. And the answer is that, the owner of what, right? The risk owner is the operations, the control owners. Yeah, you'll have HR, you'll have legal, you'll have security, you'll have IT. Your control owners really sit broadly across the business. And then, safety is around making sure that we're doing the monitoring and the assurance activities and checking that things are working the way that they're designed to. So, yeah, it is definitely that shared responsibility.
I want to use the word enabler. It's a word they use in the universities. So safety, people and culture, we enable the organisation, we enable the operations to be successful, to be productive and protected. And so, yeah, we are value added in a sense of how can we do that to make them the best that they can be.
Yeah.
Naomi, we're getting close to the end of the podcast now, and there's a question we like to ask our guests at the end of every episode. So what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
And it's a good question, and it made me think this was the toughest one for me to answer, I think. And so I'm going to actually say, go back to the beginning. I'm a health and safety generalist. So I don't naturally think towards workplace mental health in itself. Ooh, get the words out. So what do I hope for the future? I really hope for that we look at the whole body, the health of the whole body. So we're not just talking about someone's back because of ergonomics. We're not just talking about someone's lungs because of poor occupational hygiene and dust in the workplace. And we're not just talking about someone's head because of mental health issues or harm caused. So I think there's, our profession, particularly the generalists, the health and safety generalists, need to understand the risk, the psychosocial risk and mental health harm, and also thriving as well. And what does that look like in the workplace? And I think there's also the other part is business needs to understand that this isn't woke, it isn't fluffy, it's real, it can have a critical impact on their business. And so they need to ensure that they have those systems, people, and those practices in place.
Yeah, terrific. No, great response. So even though it was your hardest to answer question, Naomi, I think that you answered that one pretty well.
Agreed. Well said, Jason.
Wow, I feel so much lighter.
Do you feel validated?
I do.
Yeah. All right, last question for you today, Naomi. Do you have words of advice for listeners who want to work in the field of psych health and safety?
Yes, I do. Great was full stop.
Good choice.
Be prepared. I was going to leave the but out. Be prepared because it's not pretty. You can come across some pretty dark stuff. So be prepared. It's not all fruit bowls and yoga mats, right? Then I've got here, I wrote this down. Remember, theories and models are great, but you are working with real humans, and some have real problems that don't fit neatly into your textbook. So you need to have that empathy. You need to have those soft skills as well as the theory and the knowledge and the qualifications behind you as well.
Good advice. Thank you, Naomi.
Great. Naomi, it's been a pleasure having you back on the podcast. You're always, obviously, you have great generalist, great breadth of knowledge. And I think that was on display today. So thank you so much. And looking forward to having you guys participate in some way in PHSCon next year. But we'll leave that out there as a teaser for 2026.
I love that.
Thanks, Naomi. And hopefully we'll have you on the podcast in another couple of years.
Maybe not so long between drinks, eh?
Yeah. We'll have a drink before then for sure.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Terrific. All right, listeners, that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember, we do record these over video, and if you want to see two great pixie haircuts, get on YouTube, check out this particular episode. We also put the best of the best bits of these clips onto Flourish GX's LinkedIn page, so head over there for some short snippets, particularly for those of you with ADHD. Great way to get across the information we cover in the podcast in a short amount of time, maybe not the breadth and depth. Anyway, catch up with myself and Joelle when you're on LinkedIn. I know Naomi's on there a fair bit too. I don't know where she finds the time, but she will respond to you probably if you reach out to her if you want to continue the discussion. But thanks again, listeners. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.